The Young and the Restless spoilers full, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Although Jack begged for forgiveness, Diane refused. But she wouldn't let Jack live a new life with Patty either. She would get revenge. Jack had signed the divorce papers, and he'd even brought Patty to live in the Abbott mansion. Everything was too complicated and troublesome for him. For Diane, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was theft. It was the theft of her dignity, her expectations, and all the sacrifices she believed she had made to fight for a future that now seemed like a lie. Diane wanted to kill Patty, truly. It was horrific, but when women are betrayed, they will do anything for revenge. There's no other way. Yet somehow she became the center, dragging Jack into an emotional orbit that Diane couldn't understand or forgive. To Diane, it seemed the world had lost all order. She struggled to be seen as worthy, trustworthy, and necessary, yet she was still pushed aside, while Patty, the all-knowing one, was able to drag Jack into her shadow. That imbalance began to gnaw at Diane from within until her pain was no longer just sadness, it was a rage sharpened into purpose. Kyle told his mother he would do anything she wanted, even murder, and they hatched a plan. Kidnapping Patty was easy, but punishing her without the police finding out was what they needed to worry about. Kyle had spent years navigating a family history built on betrayal, fickle loyalty, and emotional manipulation disguised as protection. Witnessing Jack being drawn into another destructive relationship didn't evoke sympathy in him. It stirred resentment. Deep down, Kyle might want to believe his father deserved peace, but that feeling was buried under too much disappointment. What remained was a colder instinct, one that felt Diane's revenge wasn't entirely unimaginable, but disturbingly quite plausible. Jack knew Diane wouldn't let Patty off the hook, so he tried to protect his new girlfriend. If Jack believed Patty could be part of a future where he wasn't alone, that illusion needed to be shattered. Diane no longer wanted Jack to suffer the mild, complex pain of heartbreak. She wanted him back to the emptiness she herself had once endured. She wanted him back to isolation, to confusion, to a grief that left him empty and staring at the wreckage of his own choices. And to do that, Patty had to be eliminated. Kyle's role in this scheme darkens things. This isn't just a woman succumbing to the weight of jealousy. This is a mother and son bound together by revenge, transforming personal resentment into action. Patty's kidnapping wasn't impulsive. It was planned with the cold determination of people who had convinced themselves they no longer crossed any moral boundaries, only adhering to a single standard. The act itself was brutal, not only because Patty was kidnapped against her will, but also because the motive behind it was so deeply emotional. Diane wanted punishment, Kyle wanted answers. Both wanted control over a narrative that had humiliated them too many times. When Patty is finally captured and taken to a secret location, the atmosphere shifts from the illusion of revenge to real danger. Once she was trapped, once the door closed and the balance of power completely shifted, the emotional pressure became deadly. Diane no longer had to imagine what it would feel like to face the woman she blamed for ruining everything. She was standing right in front of her face, two-faced with the embodiment of the humiliation she had experienced. Patty bewildered and vulnerable immediately. The heavy oak doors of the Abbott Mansion study clicked shut, sealing Diane Jenkins inside a suffocating silence. The scent of Jack's expensive sandalwood cologne still lingered in the air, a sickening reminder of the man who had shattered her world. Diane leaned against the mahogany desk, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge. The betrayal burned through her veins like battery acid. Jack, her husband. The man who had promised her the world, who had defended her against the entire town of Genoa City, had thrown it all away for times her asterisk, Patty Williams. The very name tasted like ash in Diane's mouth. Patty, with her wide-eyed innocence and history of instability, had somehow slithered back into Jack's orbit, and he had welcomed her with open arms and unzipped trousers. Diane startled, snapping her gaze to the doorway where Kyle stood. Her son's face was an unreadable mask, but his eyes, Abbott blue, just like his father's, swam with a fierce protective fury. Kyle crossed the Persian rug, his custom-tailored suit catching the dim light of the study. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it was going to be okay. He knew the depth of Jack's transgression. I know what he did, Kyle, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I know about Patty. A ragged sob tore from Diane's throat, the pristine facade of the Jabot co-CEO crumbling. He swore she was just a ghost from the past, Kyle. He swore he was only helping her, but Don't, Kyle interrupted, gently placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You don't have to say it. Dad made his choice. He humiliated you. He humiliated our family. Kyle's grip tightened, a silent vow passing between mother and son. But Patty Williams isn't going to get away with destroying our lives. I won't let her. Diane looked up, her tears drying as a cold, calculating. I'm saying, Kyle murmured, his jaw set in stone, that Patty is a loose cannon. She doesn't belong here. And if Dad won't protect this marriage, I will protect you. We are going to make her disappear. The pact was sealed in the shadows of the Abbott estate. Over the next 48 hours, Diane and Kyle transformed their grief and rage into a meticulous, razor-sharp strategy. They knew Patty's history. They knew she was a fragile bird, prone to erratic flights of fancy. Her recent reappearance in Genoa City had already ruffled feathers, but she had managed to stay under the radar, hiding in cheap motels and relying on Jack's clandestine visits. That was her weakness, her absolute pathetic reliance on Jack Abbott. She's desperate for his attention, Diane observed late one night, scrolling through a burner phone they had acquired. If Jack goes silent, she panics. She'll try to reach out. She'll expose herself. And that's when we strike. Kyle agreed, tracing a map of the city limits on the table. We wait for her to break cover. We need a location that's dead silent. No cameras, no witnesses. Their opportunity materialized faster than anticipated. On a dreary Tuesday afternoon, a thick layer of fog rolled off Lake Michigan, blanketing Genoa City in a damp gray shroud. Kyle and Diane sat in the tinted obscurity of a rented SUV parked across from Chancellor Park. Through the rain-streaked windshield, they watched their prey. Patty Williams sat on a damp iron bench, shivering in a thin trench coat. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes darted around like a cornered animal. In her trembling hands, she clutched a cell phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she desperately tried to text Jack. But Jack was locked in a board meeting at Jabot, a meeting Kyle had intentionally orchestrated to keep his father completely unreachable. Look at her, Diane sneered, her breath fogging the glass. Pathetic. She thinks he's actually going to leave me for her. She thinks she's the love of his life. She's vulnerable, Kyle noted, his eyes locked on Patty as she brought the phone to her ear, listening to Jack's voicemail for the 5th time. She's starting to panic. The isolation is getting to her. It's time. Kyle stepped out of the SUV, pulling the collar of his overcoat up against the chill. He adopted a mask of deep concern, softening his features to channel the charming, empathetic Abbott air. He approached the bench slowly, making sure not to startle her. Patty, he called out softly. Patty jumped, dropping her phone onto the wet pavement. She scrambled to pick it up, her eyes wide with terror until she recognized him. Kyle, oh Kyle, what are you doing here? I was looking for you, Kyle lied smoothly, offering a sympathetic smile. Dad sent me. Patty's posture instantly relaxed, a desperate hope illuminating her face. Jack sent you, oh thank God. He hasn't been answering my calls. I thought Diane found out. I thought he abandoned me. Diane knows nothing, Kyle assured her, the lie sliding effortlessly off his tongue. But it's not safe for you out here in the open. Dad is worried. He wants to see you, but he can't risk being seen at the athletic club or the park. He asked me to take you to a secure location. He's waiting for you there. Patty hesitated, a flicker of her old paranoia surfacing. Why didn't he just call me? His phone is being monitored by Jabot security, Kyle improvised seamlessly. Please, Patty. I'm just trying to help my father. You know, I want him to be happy. If you want to see Jack, you have to come with me right now. The promise of seeing Jack was the ultimate bait. Patty nodded, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. Okay, take me to him. Kyle led her to his personal sedan, parked a block away, avoiding the SUV where Diane waited. He drove in silence, navigating the slick streets of Genoa City, heading further and further away from the bustling downtown. The neon lights of Crimson Lights and the towering glass of Newman Enterprises faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the desolate, overgrown roads leading toward the old abandoned Fairhaven Industrial Park. It's so dark out here, Patty murmured, pressing her hands against the window. Are you sure Jack is here? He's waiting, Kyle said, his voice devoid of emotion as he pulled the car into the shadow of a decaying warehouse. He killed the engine. The silence was deafening. We're here. Get out. Patty stepped out of the car, her heels sinking into the muddy gravel. She looked around the cavernous, rotting structure, the wind howling through broken windows. Jack, she called out, her voice trembling. Jack, are you here? He's not coming, Patty. The voice sliced through the damp air like a guillotine. Patty whirled around to see Diane Jenkins stepping out from the shadows of a rusted shipping container. Diane was dressed impeccably in a dark trench coat, leather gloves hugging her hands, her face a portrait of absolute chilling malice. Patty gasped, stumbling backward until she hit the side of Kyle's car. Diane, no. Kyle, you said. She looked at Kyle, who had rounded the car, standing shoulder to shoulder with his mother. The realization hit Patty like a physical blow. The trap had sprung. Did you really think you could sleep with my husband and just waltz around my city? Diane hissed, closing the distance between them. Did you think I was just going to roll over and play the victim while you played house with Jack? Diane, please, I love him. Patty cried, tears spilling over her cheeks. It just happened, we couldn't help it. Shut up, Diane snapped her hand, lashing out to grip Patty's jaw tightly. You are nothing but a delusional parasite, and I am extracting you. Before Patty could scream, Kyle moved with terrifying efficiency. He produced a cloth soaked in a potent, sweet-smelling chemical, a sedative he had discreetly procured from a shady contact in Los Angeles months ago. He clamped it firmly over Patty's nose and mouth. Patty thrashed, her eyes rolling in panic, her hands clawing desperately at Kyle's arms. But Kyle was young, strong, and fueled by a dark determination to protect his mother. Diane watched coldly, not blinking as Patty's struggles grew weaker, her eyelids fluttering before she finally slumped into Kyle's arms, completely unconscious. Get her in the trunk of the SUV, Diane ordered, turning on her heel quickly before the perimeter security patrol makes their rounds. The abduction was a masterclass in precision. Within 3 minutes, Patty Williams was secured, her dropped cell phone crushed under Kyle's heel and tossed into a nearby storm drain. There was no blood, no struggle, no trace that the woman had ever been there. Miles outside the jurisdiction of the Genoa City Police Department, deep in the heavily wooded outskirts past the old Abbott cabin, sat a reinforced storm cellar. It was a relic from a property John Abbott had purchased decades ago and subsequently forgotten. Diane and Kyle had spent the last 2 days outfitting it for their guest. Patty awoke hours later, her head throbbing with a sickening chemical hangover. She was lying on a narrow cot in a windowless room illuminated by a single harsh LED bulb. The walls were thick concrete, the heavy steel door was locked from the outside. A tray of water and basic rations sat on a small table. Panic seized her throat. She screamed for Jack, for anyone, but the sound was swallowed by the earth. She was buried alive entirely, at the mercy of Diane Jenkins, completely cut off from the world she knew. By Thursday morning, the silence from Patty had grown deafening enough to trigger alarms. A maid at the cheap motel where Patty had been staying noticed her belongings untouched for 2 days and contacted the authorities. Detective Chance Chancellor stood in the center of the dingy motel room, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. No signs of forced entry, no packed bags. She just walked out and vanished. Chance muttered to a uniformed officer. He pulled up the city's traffic grid on his tablet. I want to see the footage from Chancellor Park and the athletic club from Tuesday afternoon. Find out who she was talking to. But the investigation immediately hit a brick wall. The cameras near Chancellor Park had conveniently experienced a localized power surge, a little digital sabotage Kyle had paid handsomely for. Patty's phone was offline, its last ping lost somewhere in the labyrinth of the city's sewer system. The GCPD was completely baffled. Patty Williams had a history of running away, of suffering mental breaks, and disappearing, which made the department hesitant to declare it a malicious kidnapping. To the police, it was a perplexing missing persons case, a ghost fading into the mist. But Jack Abbott knew better. Inside the lavish executive office of Jabot Cosmetics, Jack paced the length of the room, his reflection catching in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His chest was tight with an anxiety he couldn't vocalize. He had tried calling Patty a dozen times. He had driven past her motel. Nothing. The guilt of his infidelity was already eating him alive, but this sudden disappearance filled him with a cold dread. The office door swung open and Diane walked in, holding a stack of marketing reports. She smiled, a perfectly curated, loving smile. Morning, darling. I brought the Q3 projections. Jack stopped pacing, staring at his wife. She looked too calm, too perfect. Ever since the weekend when the tension between them had been thick enough to cut with a knife, Diane had suddenly pivoted to an eerie tranquility. And Kyle? Kyle had been looking at Jack with a thinly veiled contempt, yet operating with a strange unified front alongside his mother. Diane, Jack started, his voice rough. Have you noticed anything strange going on in town? Diane didn't miss a beat. She set the folders on his desk, smoothing her skirt. Strange. No, Jack. Everything seems perfectly normal. Why do you ask? You look stressed. It's just someone I know. They've gone missing. Patty. Diane's eyes remained completely deadpan, a masterclass in deception. Patty Williams, I thought she left Genoa City years ago. If she's missing, I'm sure she just wandered off. You know her history, Jack. She's never been stable. Jack's stomach plummeted. The way she said it, so dismissive, so utterly devoid of surprise. He remembered the furious glint in Diane's eyes just days prior. He remembered Kyle's sudden secretive phone calls. A horrifying suspicion began to take root in Jack's mind. Asterisk. Did they know? What have they done? Asterisk. Right, Jack swallowed hard, masking his mounting panic. I'm sure she's fine. But as Diane turned to leave the office, Jack saw the faintest triumphant smirk play on her lips. His blood ran cold. He had underestimated the wrath of a scorned Diane Jenkins, and now Patty was paying the price. While the GCPD spun their wheels and Jack drowned in his paranoid guilt, another force in Genoa City was quietly observing the shifting pieces on the chessboard. High atop the Newman Enterprises tower, Victor Newman stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the portrait of himself that dominated the executive suite. The city below was his domain, and very little happened in it without his knowledge. The heavy doors opened, and his head of security stepped in, handing Victor a manila folder. You wanted the report on the Abbott family movements, Mr. Newman. Victor turned his sharp, calculating eyes, piercing the security chief. What do you have for me? It's unusual, sir. Jack Abbott has been frantically searching for Patty Williams. The police are treating it as a standard missing person due to her psychiatric history, but we tracked Kyle Abbott's vehicle. On Tuesday afternoon, he drove out to the abandoned Fairhaven Industrial Park. He was there for exactly 12 minutes, and Diane Jenkins' SUV was in the same vicinity. Victor took the folder, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper as a low rumbling chuckle vibrated in his chest. Well, 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 Victor murmured, his voice rich with dark amusement. It seems there is trouble in paradise for Jack Abbott. Victor walked over to his desk, tossing the folder onto the polished wood. He despised Patty Williams, but he despised Jack Abbott even more. If Diane and Kyle had orchestrated a kidnapping right under Jack's nose, the Abbott family was on the verge of a catastrophic implosion. Patty Williams doesn't just vanish into thin air without a trace, Victor said, narrowing his eyes. Diane Jenkins is playing a very dangerous game, and Kyle is foolish enough to help her. Victor pressed the intercom button on his desk. Get me my private investigators on the line. I want eyes on Diane and Kyle Abbott 24 hours a day. Find out where they are keeping Patty Williams. He looked back out the window, a predatory smile crossing his face. When Jack finds out what his precious wife and son have done, the fallout will be spectacular, and I will be right here to pick up the pieces. The storm was brewing over Genoa City, dark and unforgiving. Diane and Kyle believed they had executed the perfect crime, locking away the physical manifestation of Jack's betrayal. But in a town built on secrets, nothing stayed buried forever. The GCPD was blind, but Jack was waking up, and Victor Newman was already hunting. The retaliation against Patty Williams was complete, but the true war for the soul of the Abbott family had only just begun.